Welcome to Master B2B, the world's first and only Un-Webinar series. We're taking on the key issues for B2B e-commerce for manufacturers and distributors in a debate-style format. My name is Brian Beck. I am thrilled to be joined today by Andy Hoare. Andy is a veteran of e-commerce, B2B e-commerce. He spent years at Forrester Research leading the e-commerce practice. He's the CEO of Paradigm B2B. Andy, I'm thrilled to be joined with you today again on this session.
Once again, Brian, great to be with you as well. For those of you who don't know who Brian is, he's a 20-year industry practitioner and also the author of a pretty good book called $1 Billion B2B E-commerce, forward by me.
Yeah,
we'll leave it at that. Brian, great to be here.
Yes, Andy, thanks. This is a debate, right? This is not a webinar again. And we have our contenders here today, who, by the way, today we have some really fantastic people. These are luminaries in our industry and with a lot of experience. And so we're excited to get to that. We also have a sponsor today. That's Spryker Systems. Spryker is going to be in the debate with us, the CEO, Alex. So we'll introduce all those folks in just a moment. So we want to hear from you, the audience, right? So this is a debate. This is interactive. You're going to have a chance to vote at each one of our boxing rounds, right? So we have 3 rounds. We want to hear from you there, but also put your questions in the Q&A box. We want to hear from you there too. We had some questions submitted in advance, so thank you for those. We'll get to as many as we can. So, Andy, let's get to the issue here. Why do B2B companies keep making the same 3 mistakes? I see it time and time again. And Andy, when I was looking over the list of folks who are involved or signed up for this Un-Webinar and I see some signing in here now. I mean, it's again a who's who of e-commerce, of B2B. Avery Products, Avnet. I see here we got Matt Wingham from Cardinal Health, Direct Supply. Kirk Tolometis from Fastenal. We got Schneider Electric, Boston Scientific, Rexnord, Royal Brinkman, Dart Container, Sonopar. Everybody's interested in this, Andy. What is the issue? What's at stake?
Well, they're interested because everybody's had this issue before, at least 1, possibly 2, and perhaps all 3 of these big issues. So for today's discussion, we're going to focus on people, processes, and technologies. Now, there's a lot of stuff within each of these. And in the interest of time, we're going to really focus on one area within each. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I think it's interesting to kind of set the stage to think about, well, what's the context here? And I think you ran across an interesting quote recently, Brian, around why people are so important in B2B e-commerce. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, I sure will. So, Andy, it's interesting. And this is a study that Korn Ferry did, which is an executive search and organizational development firm. And I included this study actually in my book because this is really interesting findings. What they did was they surveyed several hundred leading B2B companies who had success with B2B e-commerce and digital transformation. Here's a quote from the study. The greatest issues companies face don't come from a lack of superior technology, it's not the platform, but from top-down structures, an inability to experiment, limited change management capabilities, a risk-averse culture, and inability to work across silos. Right. So, it's fascinating to me to see these challenges. We asked this question in LinkedIn, Andy, prior to this session. We said the question was, why do B2B companies keep putting the wrong person in charge of e-commerce? And we had 3,000 interactions within about 2 hours. And the reason is this is a hot topic. We see companies making this mistake. One final thing I want to mention about this study, they found 4 areas where the leader was successful, right? With the 4 characteristics. One of them was, and I'll just read this quickly, pioneer mentality, the willingness to adapt and take risks. 2, high emotional intelligence, the ability to change and inspire employees. In fact, a salesperson, right, to align the organization. 3, the ability to deal with ambiguity, right, which runs counter to what a lot of B2B cultures are all about. And 4th, they love challenge and they don't love structure. So too often we find that leaders don't have those characteristics, and that's why they don't succeed. So Andy, what about the other areas, process and technology?
Yeah, so sadly, you can do really well in the first area around people. You can have all the best people in the world, but if your processes and your technology are not world-class, it's still not going to be successful. So here's an interesting stat that I ran across recently from our friend Jordan Jewell at IDC. He said, just 45% of B2B companies measure their e-commerce efforts based on either near real-time or actual real-time metrics like sales and clicks, et cetera. And this really begs the question, what are the other 55% of the companies doing? I mean, that was my first thought when I saw this. If you're not measuring, it's not even real time, it's near real time, but it has to be based on something, right? That is ever changing. You can't be making monthly plans around, how you're going to iterate your site. So, we're going to talk a little bit about this, not the specific issue, because there's so many issues to cover. This is probably another great issue for a whole nother Un-Webinar around just metrics. Yep. But the last area is around technology. And our friends at Gartner actually studied this. And this was last year. And I want to make this point because it's probably even gotten more pronounced in the last year. But they said by 2023, B2B organizations with digital commerce offerings will see 30% more revenue and 20% reduction in costs versus those who don't have e-commerce systems in place. Why are we bringing this up? Well, because there's still many companies that don't have an effective B2B e-commerce system in place. And so this really is tailored more at those folks who are the laggards, who are waiting still. I hope the last year taught us something, which is you can't keep waiting on these things. But wanted to share this stat because we thought, for those of you who are sort of taking a wait and see approach, there's a risk associated with doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, good points. And that's, in my book, the first chapter is called The Time Is Now, right? For a reason. The urgency is here, and COVID's made that more acute. So that's a great setup. This is a debate. So in a debate, you have to have contenders and two different sides. So we want to bring those folks in now and introduce them for you. Now, my side, Andy, I'm weighing more towards unconventional. Taking an unconventional approach is the key to avoiding mistakes. You, I think, are going to be a little more on the traditional side. So you and I don't fully see eye to eye on this, but I have a fantastic team of folks who are going to win this debate, Andy. And I'm so excited to introduce them to you. Our first on Team Unconventional, our first contender is Catherine, the pile driver, Bahamonde Monosabian. And Catherine, I hope I pronounced that right. I think I did. So awesome. I got a thumbs up. Catherine is the president and GM of North American Commerce at Stanley Black & Decker. Catherine has been in this industry. Catherine, I've known you for 10 years. This industry for 20 years. Your background leads like a laundry list of success stories in B2C e-commerce. You led e-commerce at Lululemon, Juicy Couture, Alex and Ani, Barney's New York, and you crossed over to the dark side of B2B e-commerce about a year ago. So welcome. What Catherine says is her quote, "E-commerce must be freed from the shackles of legacy processes and structures." Catherine, I'm so glad you're here on our team.
Thanks, Brian. Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right. Our second contender on Team Unconventional is Tim, the flamethrower. Where's the flamethrower? He's got a flamethrower. Fabian Besser. Tim is the managing director of Europe's fastest growing and most innovative online building materials distributor. I'm going to see if I get this right here, Tim. Dyna Baushofer, right? It means,
very good.
Look at this. It brings out my German heritage. It means your construction goods in English. Tim is a serial entrepreneur, guys. He's playing the role of disruptor. He's the one that's out there going after this change, and he has to take an unconventional approach to get there to disrupt industries, and he's done this time and time again. Tim says to win in digital commerce, you must take measured risks and move beyond the fear of change. Tim, so glad you're here.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
All right, and our last contender on Team Unconventional is Alex, the Grappler Graph. So Alex, he's another serial entrepreneur. Alex, you've done this multiple times. He's the CEO and co-founder of Spryker. Alex, I got to make sure I get these numbers right here because they're kind of mind-boggling. You recently led efforts to raise $130 million for your company to disrupt the platform industry. And of course, when you disrupt something, you have to have an unconventional approach, right? Alex says a new way of thinking is required, and best practices from B2C pay dividends for B2B, but management has to be willing to listen. Alex, great to have you here today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. And then let's see, Andy, you want to introduce your team?
I do. And don't think I did notice that you had to come back this time with a third member of your team because you figure you lost the last two. So you figure safety in numbers. I get it. I understand. I may have done the same thing if we hadn't won the last two.
Okay. All right.
So now for Team Traditional, which we're going to talk later. Maybe that's not the right name for this team, but that's part of what we'll discuss in a moment. So first up is Paul Stubich. So Paul is Paul the Stinger. Stubich, don't mess with the Stinger. He's the CIO of IBT, which is a full-service industrial distributor of MRO products and supplies. Paul's the kind of guy who wants to see solid proof before making giant leaps forward on e-commerce. And he believes that established processes are the things that lead to lasting e-commerce success. His quote is, "The best way to affect positive change is by clearly demonstrating to key internal stakeholders the value of new opportunities." So Paul's approach is, let's show them. He's not from Missouri, he's not from the Show Me State, but he does live in Kansas. So Paul, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Andy, thanks a lot. Excited to be here.
So also on the winning team here is April, the Exterminator Erickson. So I've known April for several years, and April was the Vice President of Commercial Excellence for a company you probably don't think you know, but you actually do know. It's an access systems manufacturer called HID Global. The reason I say you probably do know who they are is if you've ever gotten access to any building anywhere, you take a little card and you swipe it. If you flip that card around, you'll probably see the letters HID on the back. That's one of the many things that HID does. So April believes that shared resources and proven management structures are what deliver real success, and that hiring from within is a better alternative than to bring in a bunch of consultants and contractors from the outside, which is a preview of what we're going to discuss in round one. Her quote is, "Don't underestimate your people and processes. They will rise to the challenge and improve your chances of success." So April, welcome.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here. I don't have a flamethrower. I have a Theragun, though.
Oh, there you go.
Excellent. So the battle's about to be engaged. Brian, you're up.
All right, it's that time, Andy. I love doing this. All right, let's rumble.
Okay, round one is about to begin. And the theme for round one, we got 8 minutes. The theme for round one is, where do you source talent for new roles in B2B e-commerce? The reason this is pretty interesting is because there are definitely two schools of thought on this. Here's the question. Is it better to teach B2B people e-commerce, or is it better to hire B2C people, bring them into your B2B organization and teach them about your industry? Again, two different schools of thought here. We're going to go to team traditional first. April, you have a perspective on this.
I do, and I liked your lead in, Andy. I think traditional is probably not the right word to describe our point of view. It's probably more like tested or tried and true. So we'll go with that from here on out. But my real strong belief on this one is, the more complex your business is, and I know many B2Bs to be very complex, the more sense I think it makes to grow your internal talent into an e-commerce role. Yes, you can always bring in consultants. Yes, you can bring in subject matter expertise, in a particular area, but no one knows the nuances like your internal employees do and your B2B employees. I think without that, the endeavor might fail. Just raw commercial experience is not enough. Quick story, we had a large commerce company helping us out on a CPQ project a few years ago, and it took months for them to really ramp up and become effective. And then I had our product managers screaming at me a year later when we changed out the technology, and they had to do that same learning curve, that same kind of transfer of knowledge again with a new set of vendors. They were smart people, they had great chops, but if your business has any complexity, I think that rules the day.
So Paul, you deal in the world of complexity, to April's point there. Anything you want to add?
I completely agree with April, Andy. The industry specific stuff that she's talking about, that's the hard stuff. And that's not talent that you can just bring inside of your organization. We've spent a lot of time inside our organization bringing in very knowledgeable subject matter experts to manage things like content, search, the online experience. We've recently hired some marketing folks, but really understanding the nuances of our industry and then getting that to surface itself on the web is where a lot of the hard work takes place. And April's right on. You got to trust your people. They got us here, and I'm confident they can get us through the B2B channel as well.
Well, let's hear from the other side. I suspect Tim and Catherine have a different opinion. Tim, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so my view actually is pretty different, because from my point of view, there are three major factors that we have to consider. One is time, because in the digital business you don't have time, opportunity costs, and your business model. Yeah? So if the digital aspect of your project, of your business is really important, like the core issue of your activity, I think teaching even motivated people a skill within weeks or months, where other smart people already have a year-long learning curve that just takes too long. So I think you need the B2C people with their experience to really help here. And the second thing is you need to have people with a digital background. And if your future business model will rely on your digital revenue streams, you really need people with digital expertise. And that can always be a challenge if you have, like, don't get me wrong, but old-fashioned B2B people working together with fancy B2C people, then there is some kind of trade-off. Yeah, so this is a big challenge. And one last remark. So most B2B clients also buy as a B2B client on Amazon. So if you bring B2C knowledge into a B2B activity, that's really important from my point of view.
All right, so Tim's thrown down the first gauntlet, and I think, Catherine, you're one of those fancy people from B2C, apparently. So
yeah, no. So I was a B2C transplant, insider, outsider. I can share firsthand that the consumerization of B2B is real. It is very real, and e-commerce doesn't really fit in the constructs of a large scale manufacturer. It's not, B2B is not an IT system. It's not a project. It's like an operating business, and you don't have complete information, and it just runs entirely counter to the efficiency, precision, the long lead times, everything that has made sort of a manufacturer, run. And that's why I agree with Tim that the infusion of this B2C talent is really important. And similar to him, there's two things that stick out for me. One is the similar skill set. So, it's about putting the customer first. It's about loyalty and repeat. It leverages the same kind of technology. So of course, as April said, like, there's a lot more complexity, right? We're not trying to minimize the sales channels, the sales team, like all the pricing, all the complexity that comes with B2B. And it's not, as Paul said, about not trusting your internal people. Like, you trust them, but it is the hard stuff. And it's very difficult to grow skill sets such as like merchandising that are very, very specific. And then the second reason for me, and like the bigger reason beyond just sort of hard skills, is just, again, back to the culture. So when you think about like the speed that comes from being an operator, sort of the agility, the having had to reach the customer from many angles, from having actually physically managed customer facing technology, not through a center of excellence, but actually know how the sausage is made, working in ambiguity, all the things that come, from that kind of experience, I think is really important. As the Korn Ferry study, was referenced before, that cultural change, that fast pace, that ability to challenge the status quo. You really do need that to be successful. And I think the winning formula for me at SBD has been to get those, that talent, those digital ninjas, surround them by the top internal talent, make sure that they have the humility to know what's made the company great and to know what they don't know, and the hunger to learn, and to really, solve the needs of the organization. But I think you really do need B2C also from a change agent perspective. And I think that the combination of the two is the winning formula.
So let's stick with you for the next question here, because it plays off what you just said there. So, if you have to bring these people in quickly and get up to speed quickly, are you hiring part-time, consultants and contractors? Are you bringing in full-time employees? Tell us a little bit about that. And we got 1 minute, so we're going to have to make this one quick. So Catherine, give me 30 seconds.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no sort of one size fits all, but I do believe in the proverbial try before you buy, especially when you're bringing in talent that looks so different from kind of the core employee base. So it gives you kind of the flexibility to make sure that, that they have the requisite skill set and that they can acclimate internally. But more than that, and, the speed that you alluded to, just we're a Fortune 250 company. So getting people through the process is not like, it takes months. The bigger thing for me is are the market dynamics. So, it's a gig economy, and a lot of the top talent that's very specialized, that's what they want. And very different from when I joined, my first job, and I was happy for the paycheck. And, like they're empowered, they have experiences that they're seeking. So it's also just meeting the demand of where the workforce is going beyond just the flexibility and the sort of risk mitigation that it provides the company.
April, give us 10 seconds. I want to hear the counter argument. Do it quickly.
With all due respect to Catherine, she's got massive chops in this, but I think I heard the compromise on her side. She said you need both, and I heard her say internal talent a few times. So I think she's more on the tried and true side.
Okay.
Well done. All right, Brian, well, I think it's time to move to the poll, and let's see what people have to say about this. So is it better to hire internally or externally for new e-commerce roles in B2B companies? You heard both arguments. There's an internal or an external quotient here. So tell us what you think. So, Brian, while people were voting, what did you think? I thought it was a really substantive debate. We ran out of time.
I think so too, Andy. I love Catherine's old-fashioned versus fancy. That was awesome. Or maybe that was Tim that said that, and then she layered on with the digital ninjas. That was fantastic. To me, Andy, there's no question. The unconventional is the right approach here. I think you have to go outside to hire to hire into this role. Look, this is a change in the process, the mentality, the culture, everything in a B2B company. And you and I deal with B2B companies all the time. There's a lot to be said for the traditional conservative approach to business, particularly large manufacturers, as Catherine alluded to. That said, I think you have to go outside and then surround them with B2B industry experts, surround that digital leadership, but you have to have a different mindset. And that comes from B2C. And frankly, Andy, if you look at the companies that have been most successful in digital transformation and introducing commerce successfully, they have a lot of B2C talent in them. That proof is in the pudding. I think if you look at those companies, it's companies like Illumina and Cardinal Health and others that have, a lot of our big distributors, the Grangers and the Fastenals, they brought in B2C talent to help drive this. Anyway, that's my point of view. What do you think?
Yeah, I think do not underestimate the complexities of the supply chain, especially in B2B. This is not like B2C in some ways. A lot of what happens is in the fulfillment end of things. And if you don't have a deep knowledge of that, and I think everybody on this call will tell you that has anything to do with B2B e-commerce, that half the battle is up front, the majority, at least half the battle is on the back end. And you can't just transplant somebody from B2C, they parachute into B2B and they can start telling people what to do. Any more than a general who's familiar with one kind of terrain can't just walk in and say, okay, now I know how to fight battles in water. It's a different environment entirely. And I think that's something worth considering.
Yeah, that's why you need people around you. So, all right, so that was the end of that. Thank you everyone for voting. Let's stick around to see what the audience says. All right, it's time for round two. Thank you, Andy. This one's on me. We got 8 minutes, everyone. We're going to start. This next topic is how should the e-commerce team operate within the larger B2B organization? Our first question, should e-commerce have its own dedicated developers or share developers with IT? This is a hot question. I've lived this myself. I know there's a lot of point of views on this call today. Let's go first to Team Traditional. April, what do you think?
Again, I feel pretty strongly about this one, Brian. Unless you want people rowing boats in different directions, I think you have to share resources, be channeling your energy into helping augment your IT staff. And I think your friends in IT will thank you for that, right? If you can help them, get some staff augmentation. But unless you want to be going in two different directions, I think the focus should be on working together, creating that alignment point versus creating a fiefdom.
Got it. So I would bet that our unconventional team does not agree with you, April. Tim, what do you they say? No. Tim, what do you say? What do you say to this? You're the disruptor, man. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm very sorry, April, but the thing is, from my point of view, these things are completely two different kinds of things. Working on a digital product is a forward-thinking thing. You have to think of new features. It has to be customer-centric. You have to think of UX, of all these kinds of things. The technology that really helps your customer, and of course, all your processes to come to success. And then you have the IT stuff that is more, let's say, internally oriented and not that much customer centric oriented. So we did this at our company, for example. We strictly divided those teams into two, and for us it was a really good experience because our product team now can really focus on what's important on the market, what's important for our customers. And so I disagree, and I have my reasons for that. Yeah.
Well, Tim, you come from the disruptor side too, where you're one company marching together. I'm curious, Catherine, from your perspective, you're a big established manufacturer, and from your perspective, and I know I fought this battle in my career, getting developers into the e-commerce function. But what's your thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tim completely that I think this customer-facing technology is entirely different from kind of back-end IT systems. They both happen to be similar, but I think not just the fact that it's like an ecosystem of SaaS, providers in addition to the MarTech stack, in addition to the platform, but the bigger difference I think is in the delivery model. So from the whole dichotomy of like the business and IT, and I give you requirements and you go off for a year, and then I speak to someone who speaks to someone in delivery, that whole, it just, that paradigm doesn't work. The IT person needs to understand business outcomes, and the e-com person needs to understand technology delivery. And I think that, going to like MVPs and like iteration and sort of test, learn, pivot, like all of the way that it comes, sort of that development happens means that that the digital leaders need to be able to manage the technology directly.
Gotcha. No, Catherine, that makes sense. And I was going to ask Paul, but I think he disappeared on us. Maybe we scared him off. Probably some internet problems there. Well, the other question though here, and it's really a dovetails tightly to what we were just talking about. This has to do with the physical location, right, of the teams, and the e-com team in particular. Now, famously, Grainger, when they set up their e-commerce, now Grainger is doing more than half of their sales via e-commerce these days. When they set up their e-commerce, they took them and they put them in a separate building. It's completely separate from corporate headquarters. So the question on the table is, should the e-commerce team be located at HQ, headquarters, or should it have its own office environment, separate from the traditional legacy business? Catherine, I'm going to ask you to weigh in first, and I'm going to go to Team Traditional on this.
Yeah, sure. So again, there's no one size fits all. I think it really depends on sort of where the company is in its maturity and its life cycle of like digital, proficiency. But I think new businesses, emergent businesses need time to incubate. And the role of leaders is to basically stop the antibodies from attacking and killing them. And a lot of times these businesses are seen as, small, distracting, dilutive. They're seen as projects, all the things that, are counter again to like ROI generating long lead time projects. And so I think that, depending on where they are in the maturity curve at the beginning, I do think it's important, not necessarily from an office or a structure perspective, but from approvals, from a budget management, just to rethink, how the team works and give them the autonomy to be able to really, create. And an interesting thing about our team is my team is actually fully virtual. So that's even taking it to, to another level. And we think that provides us with, sort of a competitive advantage of getting talent globally and of really giving us the flexibility and the autonomy to really, incubate our efforts.
Yeah, it's a great point, Catherine. Actually, Bill Carrier just weighed in on the comments here. Grainger opened up downtown in order to hire talent mainly, because again, it's also about the location, right? And it's about, where these people like to work. April, it strikes me that you probably don't agree with Catherine. What are your thoughts on this?
Shocker.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say shocker, right? That I disagree.
Shocker.
No, but I do agree with a lot of what Catherine did say, and certainly that no two companies are alike, and it's about where you are from a maturity perspective. The only nuance I would add right now is, if the last year has taught us anything, that co-location is a great thing. Like, wouldn't we all give our left arm to be co-located with our peers? So I think let's get together, let's align, let's be co-located at HQ if possible. And with HID, we're headquartered in Austin, Texas. So, what a cool city to be co-located. But I do think the new normal is that we should be pushing for virtual association. Like, regardless of where the offices are, where you find that talent, let's make sure that we're getting people together and aligned, virtually or otherwise, so that we have a better chance of success.
Yeah, no, great point, April. So I have one follow-on question on this, guys. As we think about where e-commerce should report, right? We think about, I see it all over the place. I see some cases reporting to the CEO, some cases reporting to IT, some cases reporting to marketing, sales. Just really quickly, each one of you, I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts are. April, where do you think the e-commerce function should report?
So I may be a traitor to my side here. I think not to IT, but I think there should be an e-commerce team that's tied really closely to IT, like they're peers, reporting up into
Okay, so
a
not,
business or corporate function.
got it. So it's okay. How about you, Catherine? What do you think?
No, I think again, it's very cultural, specific. But I think that as a framework, when you're incubating a business, it needs to report right to the CEO, right to the top. It needs to show that it has a seat at the table. It needs to have decision-making, financial and strategic accountability for results. I think once it gets to a certain critical mass of the business, you see that get more increasingly integrated into the core businesses, and it becomes, the proficiency permeates throughout the company. And then, I don't know that it needs the same level of sort of separation. So it's similar to your other question, Brian, that I don't know that there's a cookie cutter approach. You see companies, integrate and then separate, and then, so I don't know. I think it really depends on the digital maturity of the organization.
Yeah, but Paul, I think, just rejoined us by phone, and I think he's going to say it should report into IT because, well, heck, he's the CIO. Right, Paul? Can you hear us?
Well, I am the CIO, Brian, but in fact, we report right to an oversight committee.
Okay.
That reports into our CEO, and our CEO is actually part of that oversight team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good.
So
it's a different structure slightly, but similar idea. It's at the C level. It has the accountability. Catherine, to your point, there's a P&L. There's KPIs through the organization. Okay, we're out of time. We got to go to the poll. Let's bring it up. Is it better to have the e-commerce team report through the business side of the house or the IT side of the house? Place your votes now, guys. Andy, what did you think of that round?
That's another one we could have and probably should spend an entire other Un-Webinar on, because it isn't as clear cut as it might seem. And there's a lot of nuance in what people were saying there. I think there are cultural ramifications to having people located in the same place versus separate. And there are operational considerations as well. And I think you can solve the operational one and still fail to solve the cultural one. Somebody commented in the chat that people who come in from the outside get eaten up by the culture on the inside. And you might disagree with that. And you might be absolutely right about that, but it's still a reality. And if it's not going to work, it's not going to work, no matter how much you want it to work. So this is a whole change management question, but it isn't as easy as sprinkling fairy dust on top of it and saying, hey, let's just keep the cool kids over here and everybody else over there, and it'll all work out. I think there are some serious considerations that need to be made here.
Yeah, but you have to, Andy, you have to unshackle the e-commerce function from the traditional process, at least to a certain degree. Look back at that Korn Ferry study. Like what led to success? It was enough flexibility to make decisions, not to have perfect information, right? The tendency of B2B companies is I got to solve for 100% of the information. I've got to do 300 business cases for everything. Listen, guys, I like to say, this is existential, right? Meaning that your customer is going to go away if you don't have e-commerce. It's not about your business case. So my point is, we've got to pursue change, and you got to give the e-com function, I think, enough flexibility to make decisions, to test, and to fail. So we're up on time. Now it's time for round 3. Very good, Andy. This is yours. I'm keeping time.
Yeah, so this is about platforms, the last piece of the puzzle here. And how should B2B companies make e-commerce platform purchases to prove B2B business cases? That's critical here. So let's start with the first question. It's really about when and how you should buy the technology. There are different schools of thought here. So here's one. Should you buy most of your functionality needs for your platform upfront? Or should you buy it over the course of time? Let's go with the traditional view here, April. You're more in the camp of let's buy the stuff up front.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously we don't want to buy what we don't need to buy, or we want to spend, thoughtfully. But what I would say is, if you want, we'd love to be agile, we'd love to be, nimble, but e-commerce in B2B isn't a dating app, right? So like you can't have you can't get all the way through your complex order to cash process if you don't have, that lauded 80-20, the 80% of that process, well oiled up front. I think you have to have the critical mass up front of the whole ordering process. And then thereafter, you can be agile and nimble and update as you go.
Paul, why don't you weigh in on this one as well from the phone?
Sure. I'll just go back to something that Tim said, and it is all about the customer. And it's all about speed and time to market. We're an SMB distributor. We have to buy the majority of our technology pre-integrated up front because we don't have the ability to piece by piece match and manage the integration of all of these individual tools. With that said, that doesn't mean that we won't bring in individual pieces. If search isn't doing the job, we'll certainly go and replace search. But very much in the camp of buying the technologies largely pre-integrated up front, and that has served us well so far.
So let's switch to the other side quickly. Tim, you have a thought on this one. You're more in the camp of going piecemeal.
Yes, for sure. I would even say e-commerce has a lot to do with the dating app, to be honest, because because actually what you need to have also in e-commerce is lots of flexibility nowadays. So if you take a decision, as we all know already over decades, it's impossible to predict what your user will do in 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 10 years. What is the device that the user is using? So we cannot predict this, and this is something we've seen over the last years. And so, of course, you need basic systems that help you to get your processes efficient and streamlined and all the complexity. But you need to have open systems. You need to have good APIs and a good possibility to connect systems, but you cannot buy like the huge big thing and think that this will help you out over the next years. Look at SAP, for example. That is, I'm not even sure if SAP is still helping or hindering new business. And also the let's say pretty old-fashioned or traditional process of writing thousands of rows of RFPs just takes too long. It takes at least 1 year or sometimes 2 years to take the final decision what will be the platform or the system that you're going to use. And this is by far too long in e-commerce. So I'm more with the dating app.
Right. So Alex, we're going to ask you to weigh in on this one. I'm going to ask you to hold this thought and weave it into your concluding statement, if that's okay, in the interest of time, because I want to switch to the last question here. How should you pay for your e-commerce platform? Again, it's similar to the discussion we just had. You can pay up front, more in CapEx fashion, or you can pay over time more in an OpEx environment. So Catherine, the unconventional view here, the more recent view is go OpEx. Why don't you share with us why you feel strongly about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of just following what Tim was saying that, I'd love to know right now what's happening, in the strat plan horizon and everything I need to, invest in up front. But the sort of the era of like these long lead time, capital projects don't really work today. It's very different from like, I'm going to put a line in a plant and I'm going to amortize it over 20 years and I have the perfect ROI business case. You're really like iterating, you're really, building on the work, you're having a portfolio of activities, you're pivoting to what works and then you're scaling. So it's just like a completely like different model. And that lends itself more to expensing it, and the reason is that you're basically not having to tie it, like at least that for me at SBD, when you have a capital project, you're having to tie every resource, you're having to track and manage. Does it have a life? Yes, some of the work we're doing has a life, but if speed is our real currency, if speed is the thing that, that is the only asset that is completely finite that we can't get back, then it kind of reframes how we think about where we want to spend our time. So for many, sort of initiatives that don't lend themselves to that, to more of a waterfall approach, I think OpEx is the preferred route.
So April, give us the counter argument on this one. in light of what Catherine just said, what is the argument for paying more upfront?
I mean, yeah, so my perspective, and this, again, this is another maybe not a one size fits all, but we've found the company takes, or the employees take it more seriously, right? When we're making that upfront business case, making the investment, committing to something and seeing it through. But the one point that I would sort of, maybe share with my colleagues on the other side of the fence here is that, especially in a SaaS world, so much of what we do is also going to be, or part of what we do, I should say, will also be, kind of recognized on a more operational basis. So for us, it was actually a combination of the two, CapEx and OpEx. And I could see where that would make sense for a lot of companies too.
Well, Brian, you haven't popped on yet, so Dad hasn't arrived yet.
1 minute left, Andy, 1 minute.
So I was just anticipating you were going to arrive. So I think what we should do actually is buy some time here. And let's go to the poll question. We're going to be asking this question: should B2B companies buy a more permanent or temporary technology solution to prove the B2B e-commerce case? Again, you can go two ways on this. I think we've made the argument. Team Unconventional says go temporary. Team Traditional or Tried and True goes go with something a little more permanent. What say you, audience? So why don't you guys vote? Brian, what did you think of the discussion then?
Well, number one, I've never heard e-commerce called a dating app. So Tim, thank you for that. That's hilarious. But I think it speaks to the speed, right? So, I think there's really four things, Andy, from my point of view. You've got to have enough to get going and to prove, not to prove the concept, because folks, we do not need to prove e-commerce, but to establish an MVP, minimum viable product, and to get things going in an organization. I think there's four things you need. One is you need a B2C like search and navigation functionality in your first step. You have to meet the B2C like needs, not only for search and navigation, but number two, for how you're displaying and sharing product. Too often companies will deploy these, ERP plugins where you have to know the part number to find the product, right? So that's number two. Number three, you have to accommodate some of those B2B workflows, as it relates to purchasing patterns and, passing something from the requester to the procurement department, for example. And then four, guaranteed to fail if you do not get your pricing and product equivalent across channels. Don't put up e-commerce and have a different price in e-commerce than you have for your main, your other channels. So I think if you have those four elements, you've got enough to go to market. And the question, and then it becomes, how do you iterate and build upon that? So you get those four categories of functionality, and then you can go. So that's my point of view on it. You don't need to buy it all up front, but you need to buy enough up front. That makes sense, Andy?
Yeah, the only thing I would say about buying, I think the prevailing wisdom now is you want to buy it over time.
Yeah.
But, I'll give you an analogy. I love my analogies, right? If you're an Uber driver, you could rent a car and you could drive that rental car every day and try and arbitrage the difference and make money by paying, enough to rent the car, but more and getting more money in revenue. And again, making a profit margin. But over time, is that really going to work? Or is it better just to buy a car and have a dedicated resource? And so I think it's easy to oversimplify this and say, hey, all things being equal, let's just buy it over time. But there are some ramifications to not having what you need up front. And on that note, Alex is on the screen. So Alex, you've been very patient. Appreciate you doing that. We wanted to bring you in and let you share your perspective. You've got about a minute. So if you can cram it all in, good luck.
Yeah. Thank you. I try to get it in 1 minute. And regarding the last questions about the feature question, so there's a saying in the market where it goes like the moment when you're printing your RFP, like when you're pulling like the 1,000 pages from your printer, it's already outdated. And I think it's true. I've been working for Team Traditional for some years, and I was always looked very jealous to Team Unconventional and even further to Team Pure Play, I would say. And the market always believed that corporate planning capabilities that would save established companies in a more and more digital environment. And obviously, that's not true. So most traditional companies, they couldn't keep up with the speed for digital companies. And the only common denominator of success in digital projects is speed. And that is true. That is true for Team Traditional, and it's true for Team Unconventional. The ones that can adapt faster to the market, that can adapt faster to customer behavior, those win. you cannot predict market changes or customer behavior anymore. And if this is true, if you really believe that, then you need a tool for this that helps you to adapt faster and quicker to the market changes. And this tool actually is Spryker, especially when it comes to B2B commerce. We are growing fastest, we have the most successful customers, and we are the one that can help in this environment. And, I know both sides do have their point, but the market proved it already. The technologies, the tooling, the stuff we've learned in business administration studies, I don't know your background, Andy and Brian, the tools we get there that gave us the impression that we can plan everything ahead, that we can mitigate risks. Those tools are not working anymore in an environment where you cannot predict market behavior and customer behavior. And therefore, I really would go full for speed, full for team unconventional. And that's why we've developed Spryker, which is now the fastest growing e-commerce enterprise company worldwide.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex, for that. And so you're voting team unconventional. You're on team unconventional. So that's excellent. So thank you for that. All right. So Andy, I think it's time to the decision. I love that music. It's so dramatic. All right, Andy, we just had a fantastic debate there. Some really good points from both sides. Thank you for our contenders participation. So what did you think? What are some of your key takeaways from this?
Yeah, so I think we should look at each one of these: people, processes, and technologies. I think on the people front, I highly recommend an article that was in, I think it was the April-May version of the Harvard Business Review. It was an article written by a guy who published a book recently called Why Startups Fail. He's a professor at Harvard Business School. And what's interesting about what he said is that, yes, everybody wants to get to MVP. Everybody wants to get to speed quickly. But he gave some specific examples of companies that got ahead of themselves. And they went to MVP and they put it out there and they beta tested everything, but they had the wrong product. And so they ended up paying a price. And people forget that you only get so many pivots. You only get so many opportunities to incorporate feedback. You will eventually run out of customer patience or you'll run out of investor money. And so there is an argument for doing your research before you get to MVP. And everyone wants to get to MVP quickly, but this might be a B2C bias. Again, I'll represent an argument here.
Yeah.
I think B2B people might say, hey, wait a minute, you got to understand our customers in this business before you come in with your fancy tools from the outside and get to MVP quickly and discover, wait a minute, we're talking to the wrong customers.
Yeah, okay, fine, Andy, but that is not the problem with B2B, okay? The book, Why Startups Fail, guess what? A lot of the folks we're talking to have been in business for 300 years, okay? Or a long time. Their problem is not that. It's not getting out over their skis. It's not doing too much. It's not doing enough and being too conservative. So I disagree with you. In the people front, you have got to bring people in from outside the business that can learn the business, and you surround them with B2B experts, industry experts. But it is more than anything else, this is a change of mindset and process. You got to give that team enough to go. I think unconventional wins hands down, and I'll put my unconventional up against your traditional any day, Andy. Let's go. Next.
Well, I got one for you. Maybe this is another conversation for another day, but would you rather have somebody who understands the customer in B2B? Or would you rather somebody understands e-commerce in B2B?
But they're not mutually exclusive, Andy, because the most successful e-commerce folks know thy customer. B2C, we learned this a long time ago, man. I did this for 20 years. You got to know who your customer is. And so I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I disagree. Like we got to go to the next one. What about process?
Yeah, so I think on process, I think this is really about, the environment that you create. I mean, there were arguments about having on-site teams, off-site teams, reporting relationships, et cetera. I think this is really very specific to an environment, although I do think reporting really matters. I actually think it isn't really a question at the end of the day of business or IT in terms of reporting. It's who's reporting to the C-suite, who's reporting to the CEO. That wasn't really an option here, but I found in the years I've done this that if you have the ear of the CEO and the support of the CEO, it doesn't really matter whether you're reporting up through IT or business. You can make arguments for both sides. And I will say, people who argue that it should be business and not IT, in all cases, might be overlooking something, which is a lot of innovation comes from the IT group, right? And you have technologists who will see things like, oh, we could do something with the data analysis that could help us better understand our customers. If that IT person isn't in the room, because they're reporting to somebody else,
Yep.
then you'll never hear that argument. So I would caution against just assuming it should all be the business side, keep the technologists at bay, they work for you in a different reporting relationship. Be careful about that one.
Yeah, we just got a comment from one of our attendees, Stephen Javor. He said, that's the Amazon business rule, customer centric, right? And he's right. I think we're saying the same thing in that regard, Andy, that, if it starts with the customer, works backwards, we're good. And then the third is really about technology. And I made the point earlier, we've got to stop endlessly doing business cases. You've got to give enough leeway to the e-commerce team to get started, and people, people like Tim, they're coming to get you. Tim is a disruptor, right? His business, he's taking share from traditional distributors in Europe. There's folks like this in the US, across the world. They're taking share. Why? Because they're doing what Stephen just mentioned. They're focused on the customer. Why do you think Amazon Business is now the fastest growing part of Amazon? They are so focused on the customer. That, I think, is the key story. Anything on technology you want to add, Andy?
Well, interesting. What platform is Amazon Business using?
Amazon Business.
Nobody knows. Nobody cares. I mean, obviously
Right,
somebody knows, but I used to say this about eBay years ago. Nobody knew what platform eBay was using. Remember those problems like 20 years ago, and they just swapped it out?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily matter at the end of the day which platform you're using. As long as you're using it to deliver the value that you promise, it's about the experience, as we said over and over and over again. So I think companies have to choose the platform that's going to work to further the experience they want to create. In some cases, it's buying the stuff all in one up front and using, what's out of the box and then iterating. In other cases, you need best of breed. Remember my hair analogy, you need my hair clipper analogy, you need a headless environment, right? So I don't think there is a one size fits all on this. And I would say avoid the temptation to buy it all over time, because you'll probably end up paying more and it might be more difficult.
But you need something that's flexible enough, Andy. To your headless analogy in one of our prior Un-Webinars, you need enough flexibility. And I think if you cover off on those 4 areas I highlighted, I think you got enough base built in, but you don't always know what's coming. I think, particularly if you're a bigger B2B company, you have to make sure you accommodate for things that are coming down the road. So, all right, I think we're up to the point now where we need to look at what the audience, round one. So is it better to hire internally or externally for newbie roles in B2B companies? Externally, Team Unconventional. Slam down on Andy Hoare. There we go.
You might have a shot this week, Brian, for the first week ever.
No, I have a great shot this week. All right, thank you. Oh, you're getting crushed, Mr. Hoare. Is it better to have the e-commerce team report through the business side or IT? Business. Sorry, Paul, but we're going with business side here. Perfect. Thank you. And the third round, should technologies, this was close, permanent or temporary? Ooh, wow. 48% permanent, 52% temporary. Interesting. That's much closer. And I think actually, Andy, that speaks to the point we were just making about, buying it all up front or over time. And it's different for different businesses, right? What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, for purpose of argument, I'm going to ignore the first two and say they all kind of blend into the last one, which is, a temporary versus permanent. I mean, if you think about it, the hiring, the processes, there is a temporary version and a more permanent version. The permanent version is more internal, more B2B centric, more IT, more conventional. The temporary version, if you think about it, is more like bringing B2C people in, contractors, having things be a temporary condition, because you're not going to have, a e-commerce headquarters located offsite permanently. It might be for months or years, but it's not going to be for decades. I mean, Grainger, I don't know what Grainger actually decided at the end of the day, whether they brought them back to Lake Forest or if it's still downtown or if they're working from home, it doesn't matter. But eventually it comes back together. So I'm just going to choose to ignore the first two and go with the last one and say it's pretty much a tie.
Yep. Okay. Well, guys, we want to thank you, Andy, for that. Thank the panelists we have that joined us today. You guys were fantastic. Really good arguments, and we appreciate your involvement. We want to thank Spryker as well. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.